Coming up on the Nexus, rage against the machine. Yanis Varoufakis explains why capitalism is dead, tech lords rule, and we are now the new serfs.
They're just silly little boys with toys. We need to defeat them, because if we don't, we are going to become effectively techno serfs.
Hello and welcome to the Nexus. I'm Matthew Moore. Now, the famous economist Yanis Varoufakis told us a couple of months ago that capitalism is dead, and these men have replaced it with techno-feudalism. That would mean that we've all been downgraded to serfs without even noticing it, and merely exist to enrich them. That may sound like an exaggeration, and we'll debate the concept in a moment with our panel.
They don't care about destroying the planet. They would literally rather extract every last element of the world that we're living on and then jet to some other world.
You have to go to something like a universal basic income, or you end up in the Hunger Games.
But first, let's compare how we live today with the grim old days of the Middle Ages.
In feudal times, you had a king at the top, then the lords, followed by the vassals, and finally serfs. Life revolves around land. Serfs are obliged to work the land and pay rent for the privilege. Rent is a portion of their produce and income, if they make any, from selling at market. Under capitalism, the capitalist is at the top. He or she owns the capital or means of production, and the workers are not serfs, but the proletariat. They exchange their labour for a wage. The capitalists make profit, not rent. As imperfect as capitalism is, at least the worker earns a wage and can change employer. But now, thanks to these gents, capitalism is said to be dead, replaced by techno-feudalism. Under techno-feudalism, the tech lords own not land, but the cloud, where all our data is stored. And we are now back to being serfs, because although we don't work the land for free, we work the cloud for free. Every time we use our phone, purchase something online, post a tweet or watch a video, we train the algorithm to know us better, to sell more to us, and to take up more of our time. We do this for free. The tech lords pay us nothing. Capitalists still exist, but now they too are vassals to the tech lords. For example, the capitalists sell on Amazon, but must pay Amazon for the privilege, sometimes as much as 40%. And the capitalists sell their apps on Apple and Google and pay for the privilege. Everyone pays rent to the tech lords, and there's no escape.
Okay, let's bring in our guest now, and today we're joined by the economist Steve Keen, writer and podcast host Duncan Moench. Welcome to the programme, both of you. Steve, you're actually a friend and an ally of Yanis Varoufakis, but to what extent do you support his concept of techno-feudalism?
I think it's a reasonable description of where capitalism is headed to in the West, because if you go back to the 1950s, the focus of capitalism was manufacturing. Firms like General Motors actually made motors. But if you fast forward, particularly after Jack Welch in General Motors, you get to the 70s, 80s, and 90s, where the economy got massively financialized. Then we had technology come along as well, and technology framed the financial system. And now you have things like Apple, where if you, as I know from my own experience, so we had my accounts on Patreon for a while, getting payment through Apple required paying Apple 30% of the money going to Patreon just to sign on to the website. So to that extent, they're behaving like feudal landlords who took their tithe each time a merchant went through their land without contributing anything to what the merchant was producing. So in that sense, techno-feudalism is a very good classification of this current state of Western capitalism.
So, Steve, you see quite a few parallels there. Do you diverge with him on any points?
Yes, I think we still have to understand the financial system, and I don't think Yanis has probably got the structure of the financial system straight in his own analysis in general. And we'll talk about this later in the show, I believe, but the Western approach to capitalism isn't the only approach. I couldn't say that 20 years ago because there really was no rival system which you could say this works better than what the West is doing. Now we have China. So there are techno-feudalism is not the only fate we face.
Right. Well, we'll look at the example of China in just a moment. Duncan, stay with the West for now. Do you think that Yanis's description of the system we're living in under now as techno-feudalism and declaring capitalism to be dead accurate?
Oh, I wouldn't say capitalism is dead. And I like his term techno-feudalism, but I like the term hyper-feudalism, which I've used a few times better, because I would argue that techno doesn't quite accurately describe what we're living through. Hyper-feudalism describes the hyperactive nature of the digital world, and it also describes the hyper-destructive and hyper-distractive element of what we're living through, I think, a little bit better.
Whoa, so yeah, expand on that a little bit more. Hyper,
because it's everywhere all at once. I mean, you can't really escape the techno world that we're living in. I mean, you can try, but soon it will be almost inescapable. I mean, they're working on tracking systems that are already being released for white collar jobs, where they're installed on your machine and they track practically everything you do, from your hand movements on your mouse to in some cases your eye movements as you work. They take random screenshots to make sure you're quote unquote working. If you get up to go to the bathroom, that's designated as unpaid. It's everywhere all the time. Your phone is tracking you. Your TV in many cases is tracking you. Other quote Internet of Things objects are tracking you. It's essentially an authoritarian system. So I would argue it's a stage of capitalism. To argue capitalism is dead, I think, is a little strange. It's not late stage capitalism because we don't know when it's going to end. We don't know what's coming next.
Right, interesting distinction. So it is still capitalism, it's just a hyper type of capitalism. Let's have a listen to Yanis now. The last time he was on the program a couple of months ago, here's how he described his theory.
Neoliberalism was a pathetic ideology that was necessary in order to liberate financial capital in the 1970s and 80s. And transhumanism is the ideology that the tech lords, I call them techno-feudal lords, are using in order to liberate completely and totally the form of capital which they possess, which I call cloud capital, what lives in your phone, that dialectical machine that interfaces directly with your mind. From their perspective, you know, effectively they're all boys, aren't they? They're just silly little boys with toys, and they want to pretend that they have the capacity to defeat death, to defeat all our constraints. We need to defeat them, because if we don't, and we allow them to rule the world with their cloud capital, with this amazing piece of machinery that they have invented, or not invented, they didn't invent it, they are using it and they're owning it, then we are going to become effectively techno serfs or cloud serfs in a great techno-feudalism in which they are the tech lords and they entertain these pathetic fantasies. All these techno-feudal lords who will drive us to extinction if we let them remain in control of the remarkable machinery that we need to put in the service of humanity.
Well, Steve, towards the end there, he was talking about us, poor old tech serfs, being driven into extinction if we let them continue to hold on to that remarkable machinery. Do you think he's exaggerating there?
The big thing that I focus upon here is that the reason that workers have got salaries and income over the last 100 years or so of capitalism, or 200 years, is that they're required for production. You must have workers to do to tend the machines. If we get to the stage where technology enables robots to replace process workers, then the vast majority of humanity has no bargaining power to get any of the income produced by that system. So yes, it could be the distinction of people who don't own capital, and the ultimate techno-feudalist dream is to have all the labor done for you by robots, which you power, and you don't need to pay workers anything, and the robots work for you 24 hours a day until they break down. So that is a potential outcome for us. I think we're going to be trumped in getting to that outcome by climate change. But nonetheless, if we continue down the current course without the environment throwing the world's biggest curly at us, then that is a potential future world. And in that world, the prospects exist that either you have to go to something like a universal basic income, which I know some of these techno lords are talking about, or you end up in the Hunger Games.
Whoa. Duncan, you obviously think it's more apt to describe us living in hyper-feudalism. Is it the same end game, though, for human beings under what you're describing?
Oh, I would say similar, yes. But I mean, I would argue that we're already, at least most of us who are in the younger generations, techno serfs to a certain extent. So I would say that's already here. Now, the end game clearly is they don't care about destroying the planet. I wrote about this recently. I mean, all you have to do is look at Musk's totally insane plan to go to Mars, which is practically impossible, and really just a bizarre, Don Quixote dream. But why are they focusing on that? Because they don't care about destroying the planet. They would literally rather suck every last element, extract every last element of the world that we're living on, and then jet to some other world than actually live in some kind of harmonious, semi-equal state with the rest of us.
So, Duncan, in Yanis Varoufakis' solutions part of his book, he says that all of the techno lords' equipment and algorithms and platforms need to be socialized. They need to be taken on for the public good. Is that doable? How would that work?
I mean, I don't necessarily have a problem with that, but I see things very differently. I think the concept of trying to hijack these obscene cartels, these digital cartels, is a sort of fantasy, and it's another brand, I would argue, of a kind of authoritarian fantasy, because as long as they're cartels that are controlling our main forms of communication and earning money, they're going to be abused. I would argue that the only solution is a kind of return to a localist state. The solution to globalism is not more globalism under different hands, it's localism. And the solution to a hyper digital world is to start living more in a more grounded way and to detach ourselves from the digital world.
Steve, you mentioned China's version of capitalism. I want to get into that with you a little bit more. But first, let's take a look at whether or not techno-feudalism can be applied to China. Some say it is an even more apt description.
In modern China, it's almost impossible to live without the super apps. WeChat isn't just a messaging app like WhatsApp. People use it for everything from chatting with friends and posting online to booking doctor's appointments, buying train tickets or paying rent. It has around 1.3 billion monthly active users. The entire population of China stands at 1.4 billion. So on the surface, the tech lords appear even more dominant in China than in the West. But in this system there's a clear king, the communist government, which tightly controls the tech lords. When Alibaba founder and billionaire Jack Ma publicly criticised the authorities, his company was hit with massive fines, a major IPO was halted, and he disappeared from public view. The government can monitor every transaction, surveillance reaches into almost every part of society. Like in the medieval system, the king still rules.
Steve, do you think the term techno-feudalism applies more closely to Chinese capitalism?
No. This is going to sound a bit ironic to people who believe China is a dictatorial system. But frankly, there's more worry about the state and attitudes of the working class in China and the middle class than there is in the West. So it's not a techno-feudalism, it's sort of techno-socialism. And one large part of that is the desire to raise up the majority of the population. That's the focus of the economic activities in China. Galbraith once described America as being characterized by private affluence and public squalor. China is characterized by private affluence and public affluence as well. And if there was one but not the other, you'd end up in the techno-feudal system we've got in the West. But I think in that case, they can call themselves techno-socialist and more successful at the industrial side of capitalism than the West has been.
Duncan, to that end, you've come up with a concept called producerism. Take us through it.
Well, producerism is what I would argue a new ideology, a separate form of political economy that's different from both liberalism, socialism, communism, capitalism, and fascism. And it's a system where work is made primary. It's grounded in a form of technology skepticism, but it also makes work the central element of human life. And I would argue that one of the big problems of socialism and capitalism is the same. And it's the idea that we can try to make money or value off of escaping from work. And that's the exact opposite of what we should be doing. We should be trying to make sure that people get paid what they're actually worth and not allowing people to skim off of them and suck value from people who aren't actually creating worth.
Steve, your quick response?
Well, I think that's fundamentally saying you want a world in which there isn't unearned income. If you earn something, it's because you generated it or you're responsible for it in some fashion. Whereas the techno-feudalism that Yanis is talking about is large technological corporations skimming off a large share of income without contributing anything towards that income. And I think that's a valid, that really returns us to some of the interests of the classical economists and Marx to get rid of unearned income coming out of power relations rather than that of your contribution to society.
Steve Keen and Duncan Moench, thank you both. Really appreciate that. Thank you. Well, we've heard about the warnings about techno-feudalism, but are there any solutions? We're about to ask our second panel, which includes the EU's former competition economist. But first, let's hear the concerns held by ordinary folk on the streets of London.
People like these entrepreneurs who are now becoming more powerful than nation states, and very soon they will be usurping the sovereign power of many a nation state that they don't like the look of.
We use their websites for what they want us to. So I guess saying like they are like the kings, I guess they give us rules, we follow them.
I just think they're thieves. They just take all our money.
Nah, just one geezer made a lot of money. It's just capitalism, innit?
It's very unethical, but then also I think they are like corporations at this point, and I feel like they're brands more than they are people.
In particular with this circular deal with OpenAI, NVIDIA, Oracle, and the like, I think the disparity is just going to become even more apparent.
People in power are kind of subservient to big tech companies at the moment, and characters like Elon Musk.
The most valuable thing in our lives is time. And we don't have a lot of time because we're all so busy. And that, I guess, that is because of digital technology, because our lives are all on our phone.
Well, is there anything we can do to escape the clutches of the tech lords? To discuss that, I'm joined now by the economist Tommaso Valletti and David Carroll, a data rights advocate who is very worried about how platforms profit from our personal information. Welcome to the program, both of you. Professor Tommaso Valletti, you were the European Commission's chief competition economist. Do you accept, first of all, Yanis Varoufakis' description of the system we're living in as techno-feudalism?
So I accept Varoufakis' description of a big problem that we have, for sure. So these companies are extracting lots of rents using what he calls cloud capital. So they can monetize our attention. They can control ecosystems, which are similar to the land or the feudal lords. What I accept a bit less is when he concludes that this is the death of capitalism. I think we are just seeing capitalism in just its own extreme form. I also probably do not accept that there is a parallel with the lazy rentier or the feudalism time, because these companies are investing lots of money. They are making a lot of products. Maybe they are not the right products. They're not making the right innovations, but they are cannot be described as lazy people, for sure.
Fair enough. As the Commission's former chief competition economist, you had to deal with breaking up monopolies and making sure that future mergers and acquisitions didn't turn into monopolies. So you had to prevent those sort of monopolistic abuses. Have things changed with the cloudalists, as Yanis Varoufakis would call them? How would you deal with them today?
So things have gotten worse. We failed with antitrust. So antitrust typically is a wait and see type of approach. You wait to see if there is any abuse and then you intervene. But then these cases took infinite time. So the first case I ran was Google Shopping, which took 7 years to go to court. And then we imposed big fines which are big for common people like us. I imposed $10 billion on Google alone, but it's a slip on the wrist given the amount of money that they make every single year. It's just the cost of doing business. So we realized that this approach with ex-post competition policy was not enough. And so we decided to impose some ex-ante regulation, in particular in Europe. It would be called the DMA, the Digital Markets Act, and the Digital Services Act. My expectation, though, is that things are not going particularly well, because now that the Commission has a new tool, Trump comes into the picture and says, if you keep fining my companies, I will impose some new tariffs on European products. So the conversation is very much a very dirty one at this point in time.
Now, Yanis Varoufakis has come up with his own solutions. They're quite drastic. They include the platforms, algorithms, all of the property of the tech lords in that regard being confiscated, put into the public domain, and being run for the public good, not for their good. Could you justify that politically?
So I think it's coming from Yanis, it's a very draconian solution, and I don't see it coming. We need to be a bit pragmatic. The big problem when it comes to digital is that currently 80% of the digital infrastructure in Europe is not European. It belongs to American companies. So we have to start investing into alternatives. Then we can talk about the governance, but investment can also come from private firms. The problem is, uncontested monopolists are the worst for citizens, for consumers, and for the population like us.
And Professor David Carroll, you actually had to bring a court case to gain control over your personal data. Tell us your story, and then we'll ask you about how things have changed in the United States lately.
Yes, thank you. The Cambridge Analytica scandal to this day stands as a pivotal privacy scandal for the United States and the world, and is a symbol in some ways of the first Trump presidency. But it really taught me that it was far beyond a Facebook privacy scandal. What it showed was this great difference, the big divide between the United States and Europe when it comes to fundamental data rights and data protection. The quirk of Cambridge Analytica and the scandal was that US voter data was processed in the UK when the UK was itself part of the GDPR or becoming part of it. And so we had stronger data protection because our data was exported to a data protecting region. That enabled me to pursue the legal challenge. But if the data had stayed in the United States, then I would have no recourse. It really illuminated how the United States is woefully behind the curve in granting citizens the most basic data protection rights.
The political scenery has changed over the last few months, and that means that the tech lords their hand has been strengthened. Is that the case?
I see, we can imagine things as a Trump 1.0 era, and now we're in the Trump 2.0 era. And in this era, the tech executives are very embedded in the White House. Obviously, the most extreme example is Elon Musk's ability to help elect President Trump and then essentially run an agency within it. But we see many other examples of a cozy relationship, and not even mentioning crypto, another example of how the president has shattered norms. So there's a more aggressive interweaving of the tech industry into the White House this time around.
Professor Valletti, just to end the show, quick possible note of optimism. The European Union looking at ways of making Apple and Google give users, consumers, an option to change their platform if they wish and be able to take their information with them. Is that realistic? Will that help?
It would help. Like, for instance, on our cell phones, you can change your cell phone and still talk to anyone else. You keep your numbers, you have your number portability. So this technical level interoperability and interconnection is going to be helpful, so that there are still economies of scale, but for everybody, not just within an ecosystem. But we shouldn't expect too much, because if, currently we have 3 or 4 big American monopolies in, social network, in search, in electronic commerce, and so forth. And if this interconnection allows to talk to the three of those guys, we still are dominated by a handful of American companies at a period of time where they are not our good friends of Europe any longer. So it's not enough to do this interconnection for them, but it has to be also interconnection which allows through new entry through the investments I told you earlier. Where instead my optimism is diluted is that the European Commission is not putting enough resources into this new endeavor. There are very few people doing that. As the previous speaker was talking about, we have big problems with data protections, and it doesn't, give me a big hope, but that the current head of the Data Protection Agency for the whole of Europe is a former lobbyist of Meta, of Facebook. So I have a big reservations about what Europe is doing right now.
Tommaso Valletti and David Carroll, thank you both very much. Really appreciate that, and thank you at home for watching. Till next week then, goodbye.